The voice of Husker Nation is on the air. This is Hail Varsity Radio. Insight, opinion, expertise, along with the biggest names talking Nebraska sports. Join in with the show at 402-489-1240 or 1-800-825-5865. Now, here are your hosts, Chris Schmidt and Elijah Herbel.
Welcome to it. Great to be with you on a Tuesday. It's Hail Varsity Radio. We're presented by Currency. For all your equipment financing needs, go Currency. Chris Schmidt, Elijah Herbel, Connor Clark, or the twins as we call them. Can dial us up 489-1240, 489-1240 to get in contact. That's the studio line, 800-825-5865, wherever you hear us across the state here on the Hail Varsity Radio Network. Can watch the show, do so with the Hail Varsity YouTube channel. Just find that and can comment in the StreamYard. And then Twitter, always there for you, the Hail Varsity Radio Twitter feed, at HVarsity Radio. Matt says we sound like we're in a tunnel. Really? Elijah will get on that. He will threaten his computer with a hammer.
I think I fixed it, Matt. You can confirm me if I'm wrong.
And every time I move or make some sort of fake motion, like I'm trying to not get my flag pulled, this microphone shudders. It makes a sound. Is what it is. All good. Busy show. We'll spend time with Mitch Sherman from The Athletic. We'll talk some recruiting and some fall camp with Mitch coming up here in about 15 minutes. In hour two, in studio, Hall of Fame Nebraska assistant for a number of years, George Darlington, going to be with us. We love Coach George. We'll see if George is wearing a Hawaiian shirt. Coach really did an amazing job in his career coaching the Nebraska secondary, but also as a recruiter, and was pretty big time, pretty important with not only landing the West Coast kids for Nebraska, but also Hawaii. And we'll talk about that process with Coach Darlington. Matt Schick, all the way from Bristol. Well, we'll talk to Schick from Schick and Nick, and, of course, ESPN and Sirius XM. Schick with us in hour two. Guys, a lot to get into.
But first, where we're going to start it off is you mentioned the fact that George Darlington could be wearing a Hawaiian shirt. I think it's much more likely, based on the statistics of today, that he's wearing a KFOR quarter zip.
Yeah, I called you guys twins. Hey, they're the best kind. I still have a KFOR quarter zip from Carry the One, probably about 3 or 4 years ago, the Adidas kind.
You carry the one for that?
Well, maybe so. And you guys have the non-Adidas kind. I have one of those in my closet as well. How do they fit? Good through the midsection? Asking for a friend.
I mean, yes. I think they're pretty good.
You're both lean and young. So,
well, I was doing news, and I walk in, and I look through a couple panes of glass, and Elijah's standing there, and I'm like, wait a minute, am I looking in a mirror?
At one another.
Yeah.
And it's funny that you noticed it, because I'm sitting in here, and I see you walk into the studio over there, and I turn to Schmidt and say, oh, God, one of us has got to change.
Well, it's been sunny and 70 and just beautiful outside. I thought about going long sleeve, and that was on the agenda to grab out of the closet. I did not. That would have been phenomenal if all three of us would have gone with the three-peat. Plenty to get into. SEC Media Days to comment on. Venables v. Dion is juicy. Our friend Brock Eward has thrown the gauntlet down on the Pac-12 and why they're in such a horrible spot with a TV contract. We'll get into all things recruiting, and Nebraska's fall camp is just around the corner. July 30th is Fan Day, and things get rolling that way. But guys, what a start. Press release by Nebraska with the upcoming Hall of Fame class for Nebraska football 2023, and some names from yesteryear, and some names you guys both know you grew up watching. One of my favorites, and he was out of Wyoming, Troy Dumas, linebacker. Troy's been pretty awesome to us over the years, especially with the day-by-day documentary. So Troy Dumas getting the nod. Really talented linebacker for Nebraska, 91 through 94. Spencer Long, a dear friend of the show as well. Spencer Long, All-American at the guard spot for Nebraska. Really good pro career. Sam Cook, we love talking to Sammy. punter for Baltimore extraordinaire, doing special teams consulting now with the Ravens. His son committed. We talked to Sam probably a few weeks back. Team Magic, Taylor Martinez. And then as he was nicknamed by his teammates, I don't know if this was high school or it was at Nebraska, but the Mad German was his nickname, Kyle Vanden Bosch. Vanden Bosch, incredible career for him, really good pro career with Arizona and Tennessee, and just another in those long line of rush ends that kept on coming, either in that first or second round grade. But I want to get to Taylor Martinez, guys, and as we're about, exactly 10 years removed from the T-Magic era and how he burst onto the scene, that Thursday night against Kansas State, that incredible performance. You could argue, taking the Fiesta Bowl by Tommy Frazier out of the picture, that Taylor Martinez's performance against Oklahoma State in that shootout back in 2000, I believe, 10, it was one of the most incredible games played total offense-wise by a Nebraska quarterback, where you throw for 300, you run for 100, you don't commit any turnovers, you account for 5 touchdowns running and throwing. I still remember how good that Oklahoma State team was, and Nebraska's coming off of the red out round the world. Oh, Texas was terrible, and they still won in Lincoln. So you have that hangover to deal with, and then you have to go to Oklahoma State. Taylor Martinez, T-Magic, was just fabulous that day. As you look at Taylor and his legacy, how do you guys kind of view him? I look at that 2012 season and the fourth quarter comebacks. I look at the wow moments against the UCLAs and the Wisconsins. I mean, the epitome of a big play at quarterback, either with the long touchdown pass or he's going to go 0 to 60. And I mean, the guy had 100, it feels like, 90-yard runs. Mm-hmm. You're talking deep in your own territory, zone read fake, and he gets a seam and he's gone. He outruns everybody. And then how things finished up with that foot injury and how he got dinged against Minnesota. And here comes Tommy Armstrong, who had a really good career himself. But Taylor's one of those guys where he was so good and so explosive and such a highlight reel. And by the way, he got and helped Nebraska get to conference championship games. I mean, two of them in his 3 years as starter before the injury his senior season. I mean, he's kind of a complex discussion, isn't he, with just that legacy. Yards, total offense, wow moments, greatness. Yes, you were just waiting for Nebraska to get over that 10-win hump and be in a BCS Bowl because they were so close. Not all on him. And to his credit, he was just a stand-up dude his entire career. The turnovers were the issue. And sometimes you get into moments where you're trying to do too much. And between the fumbles, not necessarily the interceptions, but the fumbles, guy was tough and great, and I'm glad he's in the Hall of Fame. And
there's just a couple Taylor Martinez moments that really stand out in his career of really being those seminal moments of his Husker career. And the first one was Saturday night against Western Kentucky, his first game, because the whole story through fall camp, Bo Pelini was playing the cards close to his chest. You didn't know who the starter was going to be. Was it going to be Zach Lee, who had started the Big 12 championship game for you the year before? Was it going to be this redshirt freshman in Taylor Martinez, who apparently...
You had Cody Green, high-level recruit out of Texas.
And Martinez apparently was smoking kids in on the scout team the year before, was doing really well. They loved him there. And then, as you mentioned, Cody Green. You didn't know who it was going to be. They didn't officially announce it until the coaches show in the pregame on the radio network who the starting quarterback was going to be. And I remember sitting outside the tailgate. It was my family's first time that year, 2010, having season tickets, sitting outside the tailgate, listening to the radio show, wondering who's the starting quarterback going to be. And I always thought it was going to be Cody Green. And then they announced Taylor Martinez, and go into that stadium and to watch him just absolutely light up Western Kentucky. I think it was a 40-something point win for Nebraska on that day, and Taylor Martinez just looked electric at quarterback. And it was one of those moments where I think a lot of Husker fans kind of looked around and said, this could be a future Heisman candidate that we just watched.
And he was an early Heisman discussion point where even the national radio guys on ESPN and Fox were going, dude, did you see that kid Thursday night? Because that's when Nebraska would still play in the Big 12 and a handful of Thursday night games, and you see K-State that ended up being a pretty good team that year.
They were top 25 when Nebraska went down there to go play there.
And they just destroyed them. And it was just quarterback run that they had no answer for. And then you'd hit play action, and here's Kyler Reed running wide open. And, yeah, I mean, you went from limited quarterback assistance in 2009 to with a great defense in that 2009 number one total national defense with Nebraska to okay, you have this freshman. I remember I was going to Kearney. I was going out to Kearney with Jeff Colhane. We were doing a ball game together, and I'm like, so who are they going to start, dude? It's like, he's going with the freshman. Are you kidding me? I know he won scout team as a wideout, but that really speaks to Nebraska being different. And all right, we know he's an athlete. We know he had a few different stops in the California high school circuit, but we think he can play quarterback. He throws well enough. He is absolutely, by step 2, got that track speed, and he was thick. I mean, he took a lot of hits. He was one of those guys that ran upright, so he'd get annihilated, but he'd always shake it off, and it was good. And then you had a really good backfield there, and we've touched on the offensive line, Spencer Long, Searles, Qualley. I mean, all those guys, Caputo. I mean, they had a really talented few years on the offensive line. So I look at Taylor and go, man, just another break here or there. Because even in the games where Nebraska would get blown out, that were the big matchups,
Nebraska, Wisconsin, the Big Ten championship game,
or even Ohio State on the road. Nebraska was think of the initial meeting when you're at Wisconsin versus Russell Wilson.
Yeah.
I mean, it's still a 17-16 ball game. I mean, you're in it. You start Michigan State 2014. I know that was Tommy Armstrong, but I'm saying Nebraska came out and punched teams in the mouth, and then it fell apart.
Well, how about Nebraska, Michigan State 2012, where Taylor Martinez leads the drive at the end of the game, and
which was crazy.
Jamal Turner in the corner of the end zone. I remember I was driving up to Omaha during that fourth quarter. Got to listen to that on the radio.
They looked done. They got a bit of a break where they called back the interception at the 5-yard line. They got returned all the way by Michigan State. They called an illegal block that prevented a 2-score lead by Michigan State with like 5 minutes left. And then Nebraska's defense forces a 3-and-out, and then here comes Taylor and company. I mean, he lit up. Michigan State's defenses in that era were incredible. We're talking NFL talent, great secondary, the no-fly zone, and the quarterback they could not solve. No one put up points on Michigan State, and Nebraska, Taylor, and that offense would routinely put up 28-35 in their sleep. They had no answer for him because of that dual threat ability.
When you think about Taylor Martinez, too, and I didn't really watch him all that much when he was in the Big 12, but when he came over to the Big 10, and like you mentioned, even though it was a blowout, Nebraska-Wisconsin Big 10 championship game, I mean, that is still one of the most athletic plays.
Pump fake, that run, and it's like
time.
It's a fire drill, for God's sake, and he's just racing around.
Yeah, I mean, two of the most iconic plays in the past 15, 20 years for Husker football occurred in that game, in that monumental losing effort. The Kenny Bell block and the Taylor Martinez run.
Kenny killed somebody, and Taylor ran away from looked like 13 Wisconsin defenders on the field.
Well, yeah, and like you mentioned the Michigan State defense of how good it was, and like nobody scored on them, right? Well, like you couldn't stop Taylor, right? I mean, you could contain him maybe a little bit, but like watching him throughout that year, I think the only correct word to describe him is electrifying. I mean, I still have yet to kind of compare him to another quarterback that I've watched consistently. I mean, just
he had a throwing motion like no other.
Well, yeah. I mean, everybody kind of makes fun of that, but like the way
Uncle Rico.
Yeah. But the way he could run the ball, I mean, it was, you go to the Washington game where he had a huge run. You mentioned Kansas State where he obliterated the Wildcats. That run against Wisconsin, the last-minute drive against Michigan State, the comeback against Ohio State. I mean, a lot of different moments for him that I think some kind of get forgotten about because of other amazing plays that he's just made. And, I mean, he wasn't super, like, 75-yard run against that Ohio State team, but he led the largest comeback in school history, right?
He made the throws. People give him hell about his throwing motion, but he was more than serviceable.
Good thing he had Rex in the backfield.
He had Rex. I mean, they had Amir.
He had Halu his first year, I believe.
Yeah, he had Halu in the Big 12.
Mm-hmm. Because that was the year that Halu went for 300-plus against Missouri.
Yeah, and I mean, man, you're talking differently. You have a different take on Taylor and that era if they get one. If they get the pre-Taylor, of course, but if they get the Texas win, if they don't drop that A&M game that was taken from them, if they get the Oklahoma win where they were up 17-0 in the Big 12 title game, if they get a win either in Madison on the front end, or if they get a win in the or at least keep a tight ball game versus 70-30 in the Big 12 championship.
That was the year you
game.
beat them at home with the Scrabble uniforms.
And you came back because you were down. Before the Ohio State comeback, Wisconsin's comeback had been the largest in school history. Mm-hmm. So it was out of his hands a little bit. And that's really one of the last years where you had an offense that in most instances, in those big games against Missouri when they were ranked, against Oklahoma State, against Michigan State, against Ohio State, they could name their score. And you had a defense that wasn't quite Sioux, but you did have a year with Levante. And that 2010 team, they were top 10 good. I damn well guarantee it. We'll check in with Mitch Sherman next on Hail Varsity.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
Thanks for spending time at Hail Varsity Radio, presented by Currency. Chris Schmidt, Elijah Herbel, Connor Clark in. George Darlington going to join us in studio here in about 30 minutes. Matt Schick will join us in hour 2. We say hi to Mitch Sherman with The Athletic, at Mitch Sherman on Twitter. Mitch, did you catch some fish or just have some good barbecue, or choice C, get all sorts of relaxation on vacay? How are you?
I don't know if I had any of those. Maybe a little barbecue, no fish. It was supposed to be relaxing, but generally when you come back from a vacation, you feel like you need a vacation from the vacation. That's kind of where I'm at.
Good for you. So you got all the hours covered. Mitch, we were just talking about the Nebraska Football Hall of Fame class for 2023, and a lot of names we know. And what is your... Do you have a word to associate with Taylor Martinez? What's the word you'd use to describe the Taylor era? He's one of the names that's going to be inducted here this fall.
I'd say polarizing is a good way to go. You can have a wide array of views on Taylor Martinez. The production that he showed as a quarterback at Nebraska, that he displayed, it's without argument. I mean, he was a great player, and he could score touchdowns and move the ball. Unbelievable athlete, but he didn't win in the way that Nebraska fans were accustomed to or desired at that point. And I think you saw the talent with Taylor, and there was an expectation because of the players who came before him at that position who were similar in their athleticism, that he was going to follow in their footsteps, that he would be next in line with Eric Crouch and Tommy Frazier and Turner Gill, because those are the guys that he matched up with athletically. But, of course, he didn't win like them.
It's funny, Mitch, because I think looking back, whenever you think about Taylor Martinez, at the time it felt like the backup quarterback was the most popular guy in town whenever Taylor Martinez was on the field. But now you look back on that era, and I think Husker fans were a little bit spoiled at the time just because Nebraska didn't win the way that Husker fans wanted them to. But now you look back with some of the benefit of hindsight, looking at what the past 5 years have looked like. And I think Husker fans are able to better appreciate Taylor now than they did at the time.
Well, I think so. And if the last half decade had gone differently, then maybe the view would be different than what it is now. But yeah, I mean, he did win at a level that was greater than the quarterbacks who followed him. Mm-hmm. And I think Taylor played at Nebraska at a time where things were transitioning from Oh, this is an interesting time because you're coming out of the struggles that happened under Bill Callahan, and he got the job in 2010 as a redshirt freshman, and Bo Pelini at that point was turning things around for Nebraska. Of course, had the great defense in 2009, and it was a solid team in 2010. And you could argue that that's Nebraska's best team. That 2010 team is Nebraska's best team to date since the 01 team. I don't know that, just sitting here thinking about it for a second, I don't know that there's an argument that exists for a team that was better than that 2010 team. And, Taylor was, as a redshirt freshman, the guy leading it. So, yeah, I do think when you look back at his career now and for Nebraska fans who step back and say, okay, let's go back and relive what he did, revisit what he did in his first year as a starting quarterback. And then, he had injuries, which can happen to anybody, but they set him back. When he was at his best, and his best, for the most part, as a consistent player, was in that first season. When he was at his best, there were few athletes like him, not just among quarterbacks at Nebraska, but I would say among quarterbacks to play the game of college football historically.
Mitch Sherman is with us on Hail Varsity Radio. Excluding conference championship games, what's the one game you look at Taylor Martinez's career that as a Nebraska fan or somebody who watches Nebraska, you would like to have gone the other way?
That I would like to have gone the other way. I was thinking about like a signature moment, and I remember that Kansas State game from 2010. Boy, I don't know. I'd have to sit down and look at the schedule because there were a number of games, and they run together, and that was a time, for me, once we got to 2011, where I wasn't covering the team as much. I was at ESPN and was in and out of I was living in Nebraska, but I wasn't on the Huskers every week. Of course, he was, as I said, a polarizing character, and I certainly followed him. But to be able to piece it back together off the top of my head and say, where was he injured? Where wasn't he injured? It is hard for me to remember and say more than a decade later, hey, okay, this is the game that I wish would have gone differently. I can tell you the things that stand out to me that I remember about him are just the great speed that he showed in that first year. And I know he had great moments in his subsequent years and was more consistent as an older player than he was as a freshman. But there was something about him that year in 2010. In the K-State game, I believe there was a Washington game that year where he was electric. And those things stand out to me. Not that I would in any way say that anyone wants them back. You want to savor them, but that's what I remember most about his career.
Mitch, let's talk Matt Rule as he's back down in Texas again in Houston. Spoke this morning, did a little presentation, and I know that Texas is so important. You've got Nebraska, the 500-mile radius that's key and important for this staff. You have the state of Texas that's in emphasis as well, kind of a 1B. Where is that third area you think Nebraska will hammer or is already doing well at? What's kind of the third part of this triangle from a recruiting strategy standpoint?
I think it'll vary. If you look at the 23 class and the players that Rule signed in his first weeks and months on the job, I would have said, yeah, they're going to go to Pennsylvania. That's where he got his coaching start. That's where he has a ton of contacts, much like Texas, even more, even deeper and more historic contacts for him in the state of Pennsylvania. And it's a great state as far as talent. And Nebraska did go into Pennsylvania in a short time and found players for 2023, guys who are going to help the team this year and beyond. But the 24 class has not trended in that direction. You haven't seen Nebraska go to Pennsylvania in the same way that it did with the 23s. I'm not sure exactly why that is. And maybe there were just more options in other places. And I do think in the future that it's going to be a factor, Pennsylvania, but I don't know if it's the third pillar alongside the states of Nebraska and Texas. Those are definitely 1 and 2 in some order. And Texas has more players. So you can argue about the Nebraska maybe being more important and you really want to get every good player from Nebraska, but just in sheer quantity, I mean, everyone knows that Texas is where it's at. I think you can look this year and you can say, well, maybe it's in Florida, and maybe some year it'll be in Georgia, or maybe some year it'll be in California. I think they want to be open with that and not necessarily confine themselves to say, okay, we have to have 3 points where this is the foundation for every recruiting class.
Do you factor in Hawaii, or is that more of a go make hay if and when you can versus make it a consistent thing, or should they prioritize Hawaii?
Well, I think they've prioritized it in the way that you can if you're Nebraska. Sure. As long as Nebraska has an assistant coach with the connections in Hawaii that Donovan Raiola has, then they're going to have an in, and you're going to see things like what we saw Sunday with Preston Taumua, a 4-star offensive lineman who picks Nebraska over SEC and Pac-12 offers, programs that have had more recent success than the Huskers, and that's because of the relationship that Raiola has in that state and the relationship that he developed with that specific player. I don't think you're going to see a situation where Hawaii lines up and you get 4 or 5 players out of that state in one class, because in part just the population base of that state, the number of players who were there, it's not anything like Texas or California or Florida or Georgia or Pennsylvania, and then there's competition, obviously, but I think it'll be important for Nebraska to maintain the relationships that it has grown in these 8 months with Matt Rule in his chair, and to always try to get somebody from there. If not every year, to just always be in the running for some of the better players from that state.
Mitch, with the Pac-12 reports coming out today that they're not going to have their media rights deal in place by the end of their conference media days. That's not going to be announced, and that kind of follows a trend of the Pac-12 seemingly falling away from national relevancy. Do you see the potential for those West Coast states, California, Washington, Oregon, as well as Hawaii, being a little bit more open season for schools like Nebraska to go in there and get some higher quality kids that you might not have been able to get 10 years ago?
Well, maybe from like Arizona, depending on what happens to that league. And, if Arizona and Arizona State find a home in another conference, we may not have that happen this offseason. This offseason, the days are growing short before camps open. I don't know if we're going to have big news on realignment this July like we did in the summers a year ago with UCLA and USC, and the year before that with Texas and Oklahoma. But that doesn't mean that it won't happen down the road. It could happen after the season. And if that's the case with Arizona and those schools defect, or just kind of slide into the second tier as like a Mountain West level conference, then, yeah, I do think that the SEC schools and the Big Ten schools are going to hit Arizona in the Phoenix area even heavier than what they've done in the past. And Phoenix gets recruited, of course, by all schools from all of the big conferences. California, it's like a country of its own. So as far as recruiting goes, and there's segments, and there's different states within California. So I don't know that you can put California in one category. And of course, the 2 biggest, most historically relevant programs from that state are headed to the Big Ten. So that's not really going to matter for them what happens to the Pac-12. But Arizona, yes. I can see it, sure, with Hawaii and not as many players from Hawaii looking at Pac-12 schools or whatever happens to those Pac-12 schools. Maybe the same in Oregon and Washington, but that's going to be largely dependent on what happens with the big programs in those 2 states.
Mitch Sherman with us from The Athletic, at Mitch Sherman on Twitter. Mitch, we'll let you go. Thanks for giving us a few minutes today, bud, and we'll bump into you hopefully next Tuesday and for sure wave at you in Indy. How's that sound?
Okay, sounds good. Thanks, guys.
Appreciate you. There he is, Mitch Sherman with us on Hail Varsity Radio. Good stuff from him. What's Brock Eward say about the Pac-12? Some thoughts from the Fox analyst. George Darlington coming up next hour.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
Big thanks to Mitch Sherman. Be sure to check out the podcast, Spotify, iTunes, Google Play. and can find that on the, also on the Hail Varsity YouTube channel. Get the segment or the entire show, whatever you like. Take the segment with you or just download the entire show. It doesn't cost you anything to download the Hail Varsity radio show or, for sure, the Hail Varsity YouTube channel. Get subscriptions to that and enjoy all the content you want. Reminder about your friends from Dyer Law. If you've been hurt in a personal injury accident, you can count on the Dyer Law team to provide you with a helping hand when you need it, no matter what you're dealing with. So call the team in Omaha today at Dyer Law, 1-800-DYER-LAW, or visit dyer.law to chat with trusted professionals about your personal injury claim. That's dyer.law, 800, I'll make that 1-888-DYER-LAW, dyer.law. Visit today and get your personal injury accident the settlement that you deserve. Guys, Pac-12 on our mind, you touched on it a little bit, Elijah, and got this sent to us by our dear friend Bill Dolman, the pride of Fairbury. And Brock Ewart has been on with us a number of times. He did the coverage of the game in Ireland. He did the show with us when we were on the road for Illinois, that Week 0 game, and came out to the courtyard and sat down with us. So we've got a good backstory and relationship with Brock Ewart, and Brock does radio in Seattle weekday mornings. And he really kind of let some schools have it as to why the TV contract is such a mess with the Pac-12. And I don't disagree with him. You got to, for lack of a better term, pull your own weight, dude. And there are just schools in the Pac-12 that just don't give a damn about football. And what Ewart was talking about, case in point, again, we've relived a lot of the 2010s here. But it wasn't that long ago, you had Jim Harbaugh, Andrew Luck, and Stanford. And they go 12-1. They're a top 5 team. They're killing people with an offensive and defensive line. And, oh, yeah, by the way, they've got an incredible quarterback. And you have, and Brock said this on his show Friday morning, you have both those guys. You're a legit national champion contender, and you can't even sell your stadium out, Stanford. Shame on you. You have Marshawn Lynch showing back up at Cal. And, you know, he gets bleeped on the sideline because he's like, where the heck is everybody at? There's nobody here for this game. There's nobody here for Cal. And you had, God, who's the wideout that played for Philly? Deshaun Jackson. Deshaun Jackson, Marshawn Lynch, and you had Darkness Retreat, all three on a Cal team at one point in 2004. That was top 8 good, and then they kind of faded down the stretch. Both those programs, both the Bay Area schools, are two programs that Luck, I should say, that you were singled out. And listen, the networks have zero trust in the Pac-12 anymore because no one's going. What was great TV? It was Pac-12 after night with the Pirate and Washington State in some sort of snowstorm. That's what you got at midnight as your buzz is wearing off. Or you got USC and Oregon. Other than that, and maybe it was kind of fun to watch Arizona State late at night with the Herm experiment. But they've made their own bed here, fellas. And if and when Oregon and Washington defect, they're going to get a paltry share. It's still going to be way better than what they would get in the Pac-12 with their media rights deal. And that's how they're going to have to settle. Either that or, as Mitch touched on, they just kind of slide in and become, dare I say, a group of 5 versus being a team that used to send somebody, a conference that used to send somebody to the Rose Bowl every year, and it was great theater in the college football world.
Well, think about the Pac-12. What do they have to sell? You kind of laid out the fact that nobody fills up their stadiums. You think of the schools that fill up their stadium, it's Oregon, it's Washington. I mean, USC, it's a tough sell in LA for the big games. They'll get some fans there, but they have a big stadium to fill.
But it's still 100,000 that gets 60. Same with UCLA and the Rose Bowl.
I was just going to say that. Same thing. Same thing with UCLA in the Rose Bowl. They struggle to fill that stadium up as well.
Well, Wazoo fills it up too, but just because nobody's got anything better to do out there.
No,
too.
I mean, you hit some fireball and you put on a parka and you go watch somebody come to town and yeah, I mean, but it was, and you had a personality as a coach there before he left.
And they were damn good when he was there too.
And then think about the TV side of things as well. What's been the big moneymaker in college football over the past 3-4 years? It's been that big noon kickoff slot, which is 9 a.m. on the West Coast. Those West Coast teams don't get spots in big noon kickoff. So you can't sell that if you're the Pac-12. You can't say, well, we're going to have a great game to put up at 11 a.m. or noon East Coast. No, you're not. It's 9 a.m. You're not going to have anyone playing. And even if you did, it probably wouldn't be a great matchup. You'd have half the stadium full because who's going to show up at 9 a.m.? No one at Stanford or Cal or USC or UCLA or Arizona State or Arizona, none of them are showing up at 9 a.m. So what is your selling point?
7 p.m.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Your selling point is that 7 p.m., 9, 10 o'clock game, which that's not going to turn heads for the big media people in the world. It does it for the college football fan that has nothing better to do on a Saturday night? Yeah.
There's just not as many college football fans out there. There's other things to do. I get that. But when we talk about the academics of Cal and Stanford, they really don't care if they have football or not because they have so many grants and tech endowments. They're going to print their own money that way if you're Stanford.
Mm-hmm. And this is like the point we keep coming back to of for a TV rights point of view, who wants the Pac-12? Who wants institutions that don't care all that much? Their fans don't care all that much. The only people you're getting in are the college football fanatics to come watch your game late at night because you're the only game on. What are you selling? What is there to be sold if you're the Pac-12? And then to your point, Schmitty, what's keeping Oregon and Washington around?
Nothing, and they need to get out. The Arizona schools need to get out. Utah and Colorado need to get out. And sorry, Oregon State, you've got a hell of a good coach and a good program again. You need to find your way somewhere. I mean, if I'm the Pac-12 schools that are stuck with the Berkeleys and Stanfords of the world, and those two schools, while they're incredibly prestigious, and if you can get in, man, you're a smart dude or lady. And that's off to the side. That's the academic side. That's super prestigious. It's incredible. That said, it ain't meshing up with sports. And that's why they've been so hit or miss. They either get an amazing coach or they lose an amazing coach. I mean, it wasn't that long. It's been 30 years, but he had Mariucci there at Cal winning ball games. You had John Elway at Stanford 40 years ago. And it doesn't matter. You had Shaw there winning ball games, and he stepped down. Stepped down because he wasn't living up to his own expectations, but you weren't even a shadow of what you were under Harbaugh because it's so hard to win there and recruit there. And what Brock said is so right on. You broke the trust of the networks. You don't show up. You don't care. Guess where we're going to go? We're going to go to Lubbock. We're going to go to Manhattan. We're going to go to Ames. And we're going to get more viewers. Mm-hmm. And people are going to show up. It's going to be a better product. And this is just a really bad situation for the Pac-12. And there's no hope in sight here network-wise.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
One final time this hour, it's Hail Varsity Radio. We're presented by Currency. For all your equipment financing needs, go Currency. Chris Schmidt, Elijah Herbel, Connor Clark. Give us a find on Twitter and follow at Schmidt_radio at Herbal Essence for Elijah. For Connor Clark at C_Clark_27. You showed me this a little bit earlier, and I don't know where either of you are at with bobblehead collections, but the Royals last night had the mother of all bobbleheads. It was Bo Jackson night, and it wasn't just Bo. There's a lot of moments in Bo. There's Bo hitting the home run, like that follow-through swing with the All-Star game. There's Bo putting the gun back in his holster after hosing Harold Reynolds at home from left field. And there's Bo busting the bat over his thigh or his helmet, like it's a toothpick. But then there's the Bo moment of him running up the wall. after making a catch. I don't remember where that was at, if that was against the Angels, if it was against the Yankees, if against the Twins. I'm not sure, but he just went Spider-Man with those throwback Nike real metal cleats, and he ran up the wall sideways and back down. There's one time where he slid it home and was safe, and he's on his back, his knees are up, and he flips up into the air from a back on the ground, butt on the ground, seated position. One of those, oh, this dude's got to be some sort of gymnast. No, he's just Bo Jackson. But the bobblehead that was put out last night is just awesome. We're putting a picture of it up now on the Hail Varsity YouTube channel. And this is cool. Where Bo's running up the wall, and after he made a great catch. I love that. I haven't gotten bobbleheads for a long time. I have my grandmother's I inherited. Sammy Sosa bobblehead. She loved Sammy. She loved the home run chase. I did not have the heart to tell her Sammy was allegedly a pincushion.
Thanks for throwing in allegedly there.
No, I got to do it. I got to do it. So
I'm sure Sammy's listening would definitely throw you a lawsuit if you didn't say allegedly.
Right, allegedly a pincushion, and so there's that. So, but that's cool. I mean, I would love that bobblehead.
Well, it's just it brings the uniqueness to it, and that's what I was always like. Wasn't a big bobblehead guy unless it was signed or something cool, because they're all the same. Oh, it's a different uniform, it's a different head on top. That's unique and that's cool, where you have the wall in the bobblehead kind of as like your background, and it's Bo Jackson running up. That's the iconic moment. You talked about the breaking of the bats. That's what I think of with Bo, over the knee and over the head. But then this is a close second with him making that play out in the outfield and running up the wall in order to stop himself and then gunning it back into the infield. That's phenomenal. It's Bo Jackson in a nutshell, and also one of the greatest 30 for 30s that they ever made.
It was awesome. I read his biography when I was in junior high. Dick Schaap helped write it, and Bo was as he said, a naughty kid growing up, and he loved playing catcher because you could touch the ball every play, and there's a reason he never signed with the Yanks or Tampa when he was drafted number 1 overall. He was not a George Steinbrenner guy, and blames them for losing his senior season of eligibility for Auburn baseball. Not a bad squad where you got Frank Thomas and Bo Jackson on the same baseball team. Hour 2's on the way. George Darlington, Hall of Fame Husker assistant for a number of years. He's on the way. And Matt Schick will join us at Hail Varsity.
The voice of Husker Nation is on the air. This is Hail Varsity Radio. Insight, opinion, expertise, along with the biggest names talking Nebraska sports. Join in with the show at 402-489-1240 or 1-800-825-5865. Now, here are your hosts, Chris Schmidt and Elijah Herbel.
Back with you, it's Hour 2 at Hail Varsity Radio. We're presented by Currency. For all your equipment financing needs, go Currency. Chris Schmidt, Elijah Herbel, Connor Clark, Hall of Fame assistant with Nebraska football for a number of years. George Darlington is in, and I was right. You've got the Hawaiian shirt going, Coach.
You've got to. It's the summer.
It is the summer, and you've always got a great collection of Hawaiian shirts. We're excited to have Coach Darlington in to talk a little bit about Hawaiian recruiting, the West Coast. Also, Football Facts is back for another football season with Coach Darlington in Lincoln and in Omaha. We'll get you that information. And, oh, yeah, by the way, football season in camp is less than 2 weeks away. Coach, good to see you. You look great. How you doing?
Doing fine. Doing fine, and it's great. The season's about ready to start.
Yeah, it is. A lot of excitement, a lot of hope, and a lot of energy with Coach Rule. Before we get into all of that, Coach, tell folks real quick about Football Facts and how long you've been doing them. I'll get the dates and the locations in a moment, but you love connecting with Husker fans. You have for years.
39 years.
39, huh?
Yeah.
Wow.
Haven't quite hit 40 yet. I had a few years I wasn't here after getting fired, so
Sure.
the class didn't start up till I got back here.
I got you. Sure. Well, you've got 2 different sessions that are going on, and you have the Omaha session that starts September 26th, and that runs through November 7th from 6:30 to 8:30, and that is going to be at the Faithful Shepherd Presbyterian Church, and that's just right around 165th Avenue, 2530 165th Avenue, the Faithful Shepherd Presbyterian Church. We'll get a tweet on these out as well so folks can get signed up that way. With the phone numbers and the emails. Also in Lincoln with your friends at SEC.
Yes.
And that is in Lincoln, September 28th through November 9th. And that is at the Continuing Education Center at South 68th. So 2 locations, Lincoln or Omaha. And Coach, just a real quick thought on the class and just the feedback you've gotten for almost 40 years of teaching football facts.
Well, the main thing with the class, regardless of your knowledge of football, we start as if nobody knows anything.
Okay.
And because...
You take radio people.
Well, we want people that don't know anything. I'm not sure
You've come to the right place.
I'm not sure the category you men would be in. Yes. Yes, we... and we're going to have a joint banquet at Parker's... on the 9th of November.
Oh, good.
So we're excited about that because they have excellent food.
Yeah, got to get some ribs, huh?
Yes.
Yeah, some ribs and some burnt ends. I love it.
And Coach, one of the interesting things to me this year about your football facts class is the fact that it's a brand new defense that we haven't got to see at Nebraska before in the 3-3-5. And I want to get your thoughts. 5 defensive backs on the field. Is that a dream for you, or what is your thoughts on that new defensive scheme?
Well, we had 5 on the field most of the time in the latter years. If you're only playing with 3 down linemen, obviously you have to have at least one more linebacker. The starter of the 3-3-5, if you want to talk about it, is Rocky Long, and he was one of my failures in recruiting. When I was at San Jose, went on to coach at New Mexico and different places. And it'll be fun to look at because we ran a lot of 3 down linemen. We actually ran with 2 down linemen, and then we'd have a outside backer if we were in a 3-man front. So it'll be fun, but there's nothing new under the sun.
So it's been looked at, the versatility and athleticism. You're getting some fast, some physical guys on the field.
Well, they're making a point, which I'm encouraged by, of getting people that can run. The field's awfully wide, and if you can't run very well, you're going to be in trouble. So it'll be fun to watch the different adjustments and things of that sort out of the 3 down lineman situation.
George Darlington's with us, longtime Husker assistant, Hall of Fame assistant with Nebraska football, joining us here in studio. Hail Varsity Radio. Football Facts gets going September 26th in Omaha, September 28th in Lincoln at SEC. So that's a Tuesday, Thursday sign-up session with Football Facts. We're going to tweet out the flyers here so you can get signed up if you want to get all the lowdown on football, Nebraska football with Coach Darlington. 39 years is what he's been doing for Football Facts. And what do you think of this year's secondary? There's a lot of kids that are coming back. There's a lot of familiar faces. It's a new system, Coach Darlington, that Elijah touched on. But do you feel pretty good about some of the options they have to play in that back 7 when we talk about this new defense?
Well, there's going to be a lot of infusion of people, and there'll be always, I'm sure, 5 DBs on the field, and maybe more. We called that our nickel package. And then when we wanted to have a dime package, we had 6 DBs on the field. And we wanted a quarter system, we had 7 DBs on the field. And so, the variety and the skill set of the players and how they'll fit in will be interesting to see. And, they're excited about it. Hopefully they have people that will fit in and can do the various things they want to do. But, it gives them a lot of opportunity to do different things. We did an awful lot of things, and people didn't necessarily realize it. But when I started coaching at Marshall, we had a coach who was on the Florida staff, and a assistant coach said, we were having supper, and he said to the coach that had come from Florida, well, it must have been pretty easy to prepare for Nebraska because they didn't do much. And he corrected the young lad in a hurry. He said, son, you do not realize how many different things they did. You've been reading the paper. You haven't seen the film.
George Darlington's with us. It's Hail Varsity Radio.
Sounds like that guy needed football facts.
Yeah, football facts for sure.
Well, he had an interesting story. His great-grandmother was the last person ever hung, and the last female ever hung. It was his great-great-grandmother.
That's not a football fact.
Yeah, she was supposedly involved with the assassination of Abraham Lincoln.
Oh, I think I've heard this story.
So this is West Virginia. You're at Marshall, right?
At Marshall, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And his great-great-grandmother was the last person female ever hung.
Well, I think she would have been the person who ran the inn where all the people who were involved with the conspiracy stayed before the
So she knew about it and said nothing.
Well, I'm not so sure that's true.
Okay.
And in fact, her daughter tried to get the government to not hang her, and she literally crawled up the steps of the Capitol to try to generate help for her grandmother or her mother. So it's an interesting part of our history because right after the war and then the president's assassinated, there were an awful lot of people wanting to, get to the root of it.
Sure. Coach, got to switch gears, talk some recruiting, and get your thoughts on what Nebraska is doing in Texas, and also just your time in Hawaii. Nebraska got a verbal commit over the weekend from Hawaii, an offensive lineman. You were Nebraska's lead recruiter, not only on the West Coast, but you also kind of broke into Hawaii. Tell us a little bit about how Hawaii came on your radar, Nebraska's radar, and your decision to go in and go after the Raiolas and Finotis and some of the other great players.
Well, somebody had to take it.
You volunteered to go to the island.
I volunteered. But, we lost a player the year before. We were getting ready to play in the national championship, and he went to Washington, and his best friend, Dominic Raiola, was a year younger, and I didn't screw that one up.
But just the thought of going into Hawaii, getting a guy like Finoti, getting a guy like Dom, and just Nebraska's presence, how did you get that initial connection and make the inroads? I mean,
this thing called winning.
Well, sure.
We were winning, and the people out there
called winning.
Kind of embraced Nebraska, and it really was helpful because they called first from the major high school, and I started going out there, and of course I couldn't pronounce their names, but they knew where Nebraska was, and it was fabulous. I mean, the sad thing for one fellow who coached at Colorado, he was from there.
Okay.
He was Polynesian. He knew all the people, and we kept beating him on recruits.
Oh, wow.
They came to Nebraska because we were winning, and we're playing for national championships. And Mr. Raiola's dad was very helpful. And it was exciting because from thinking that we couldn't get a Hawaiian kid to realizing in a year, hey, people are going to have a hard time beating us on a recruit. And that was really true because of the success we were having.
George Darlington's with us at Hail Varsity Radio. You get Dom. Dom's a great player. You get Finotti, and then
we get Tony Tata.
Tata, linebacker.
Played for a few years, and one other Polynesian player who was a second teamer, and then of course Finotti, who was an excellent player.
What was the recruiting process like to get Finotti? Because he played early, and he was as big as a house, and great feet.
Well, in all honesty, his mother recruited us.
Really?
Yeah, she called and couldn't understand why we weren't calling her son, because they had a home in Southern California and a home in Hawaii, and he played 1 year in California, came back to play there, and you learned a few these. Number one, if the UTU doesn't bless the recruiting, you're dead meat.
What's the UTU?
He's like the highest father figure. If there's a grandfather or whatever, a kid would never go to your school. But if he said, my son is going to Nebraska, you didn't even have to worry recruiting for the next 4 or 5 weeks, because it didn't matter if a Polynesian coach from Colorado tried to convince him to change his mind. It wouldn't happen. I mean, it was cast in concrete, I guess you'd say.
Sure.
So that was really, really interesting. Also, when you went to visit their home, you never wore your shoes in the house. Your shoes were always parked on the stoop outside.
Okay.
And remember Finotti's shoe size, because his shoe was out there too. And I think 2 of mine maybe would have equaled one of his.
How big a feet did Tone you have?
Oh, I think he had at least 17s.
George Darlington's in studio with us, Hail Varsity Radio. Coach, couple minutes left. Thoughts on Nebraska and their emphasis, not only on what they've done in state, but the work they've done in Texas. How big could that be?
Well, it's big because that's where a lot of them are from. They know more people down there, and yet they're getting players from other parts of the country too. It's kind of a replacement for California in some respects, because even before I came to Nebraska, we were in California, and we were getting players from California. And, of course, Texas, most of their staff being from Baylor, they know a lot of people down there. The only caution I ever had with recruiting Texas players is some of them were so well coached in high school that you had to make sure their dimensions were what you needed to be successful. Because if you would watch the film of a kid from a big school in Texas and compare him to a small-town kid in western Nebraska, well, the kid from Texas had, in essence, college-type coaches coaching him.
Oh, wow.
And then a kid in Nebraska maybe had the head coach, and, he maybe didn't play that position. So you had to be careful that, hey, is he really big enough, fast enough? He's going to look excellent on film because he'd been coached so well. And that's the only concern. You got to make sure the dimensions, height, weight, and speed factor into it. And, with them coaching down there, they know the schools, etc.
George Darlington in studio with us at Hail Varsity Radio. Coach, we love hearing from you. We'll do this again. Can we go get a taco sometime?
Well, you just never call.
I call, I text. Listen, baseball season's about done.
Well, we hope not too soon.
Well, no,
your son's playing in the playoffs.
We got to go to the state.
Yeah, you want to make sure you don't sleep on the porch tonight. But
Coach, we'll see you again soon. Thanks for the time today.
Fine. Thank you for letting me come in.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
Back into it. It's hour 2. It's Hail Varsity Radio. We welcome in with ESPN, Sirius XM, College Football Live. We say hi to Matt Schick, the Schick and Nick show, of course, on the Hurrdat Podcast Network. Schick, how is the East Coast, man? Thanks for a few minutes.
It's great. Usually in Charlotte, I am talking to you live from the DoubleTree Hotel in Bristol, Connecticut. I just got off the set of College Football Live, and I am now alone, by myself, with no kids, no spouse, and very lonely. There's really nothing to do except talk to a local Lincoln radio, so it's good to fill the void.
Well, you are very kind. Is there a hotel bar? Is there a sauna? I mean, can you unwind a little bit?
I'm not sure anyone wants to see me in a sauna, but there is a restaurant downstairs, floor 1. It's a sports bar. It's revamped. I think about it a lot when I'm at work. Like, when am I going to get to eat? And what am I going to get to eat? They got good pizza, good nachos. So I'll probably navigate toward the gym area soon. I will try and get in a little bit of exercise. As soon as I start feeling the first drop of sweat, then I know it's time to leave and go eat. So I'll do that.
How many Bills articles are up in this sports bar? Do you bring your own?
Not yet. Not yet. It's that and Buffs and Bills. I try to. Right now I've got my Athlon Sports College Football magazine, just flipping through that and finding out, just learning about all the teams that are going to beat my alma mater. It's fun.
Tell me, Matt, you're a guy who's been around the country a decent amount for work, and you've probably seen your fair share of sports bars. What's that one menu item that you're going to go to a sports bar, and that's what you're going to judge it on? You get one chance to eat there. You get one meal to pick. What meal are you picking to judge that sports bar? Really, I guess if we're saying it, you're going to be judging a book by its cover based on that one meal, but what is that one dish that you think is fair to judge a sports bar upon?
My father-in-law has a good rule of thumb. The first thing you have to get at the sports bar is the burger and fries. If they screw that up, never go back. That's like entry level. It's like, hey, I don't know how to make a PB&J. All right, well, I'm not going to have you make my lasagna either. So there's a lot there, but I think it's right now it's burger and fries. But I also need their chicken quesadilla, their nacho, basic things need to be pretty buttoned up. But I think if you stray too far from burger and fries to see how, hey, it's my first time here, I'll have the salmon, then that's probably not a good idea.
You are a brave soul going with salmon at a sports bar, man. That's all I'm going to say. Schick, let's talk a little bit about the SEC. Their media days are ongoing this week. We head to Indy next week for Big Ten media days, and then fall camp is around the corner. There's plenty of questions out there, and I know that we had a talking point yesterday about Saban and the Bama legacy. What's your temperature right now on Saban, Bama, and where they are? Are they still it despite what George has done, or are they trying to get a little street cred back?
It's interesting. I use the phrase first world problems a lot. Alabama had 2 losses last year, and both on the last play of the game. And both on the road, and 1 in overtime. Like it's the dynasty's not over. They're not going away. The recruiting class rankings are top 3 year after year after year. The difference is you just haven't won it the last couple of years. You didn't make the playoff. You're replacing a Heisman Trophy winner. So the unknown at quarterback almost has you flashing back to how they used to do it, 6, 7, 8, 9 years ago, before Tua. Before Mac Jones, before Bryce Young, where it's let's play some D, let's run the ball, and just have our game manager quarterback. I don't think Jalen Milroe is going to be a guy they're going to just ask to hand the ball off and get out of the way. I think he's got some athleticism. Ty Simpson is a redshirt freshman that, by many accounts, is likely going to get the job eventually. But, when you bring in a Tyler Buckner in the offseason in April, bringing in a transfer quarterback is not part of the process there at Alabama. No offense to Jay Coker back in the day from Florida State. So I'm a little bit concerned about Alabama, but it's not because I don't think they're elite. I just think it's how do you beat Georgia, and what does it take for a team that reloads? These teams go back and forth. I think Alabama's just fine. I think everyone outside of Georgia would love to be Alabama, and that's a good issue.
Matt Schick is with us on Hail Varsity Radio, and sticking with the SEC for a second, Matt, what is another team in your eyes in the conference that could make the leap, that could be another team that potentially disrupts with Alabama? I don't want to say beat them, but just gives them a little bit of a hard time with their so-called fall from grace this year, because that's just been the media storyline about them.
I think it's LSU. I think Jane Daniels surpassed all expectations last year coming in from Arizona State. Mason Smith is a really good defensive tackle who played 5 snaps and then tore his ACL. He might be the best defender on the team, with apologies to Harold Perkins, who had a blowout freshman year last year. So I think there's a lot to like about it for LSU. I also think you've got to be a little weary of setting the bar too high too soon. 10 wins, probably a little bit too soon to do that right out of the gate. But, for a program that's won the SEC West 2 out of the last 5 years and including a national championship, those things are significant. So I think the talent level is there. I think Brian Kelly is just on par in terms of football acumen and being a good head coach, just on par with Nick Saban. And being there in the West, I think that's where it is. I know Tennessee is getting love, and I would co-sign most of that. Just want to make sure that their defense holds up. I'm not ready to hitch my wagon to Joe Milton. He's not Hendon Hooker. Let's see how he does. But Tennessee gets Georgia at home in November, so that's to their advantage. But I would still say it's Alabama, Georgia, with Georgia number 1, and then LSU in 3rd, and then Tennessee 4th.
It's Matt Schick with us here, Hail Varsity Radio. And Matt, let's switch gears here just a little bit. Let's keep it in the SEC, though, but we're talking teams with some higher expectations. Tell me about the coaches you think could be seeing their last media days here this week, with coaches that you think could be on the hot seat depending on what goes down in 2023. The number one team that stands out in my mind is Texas A&M and Jimbo Fisher, but I want to get your thoughts on some other guys who might be feeling the pressure this media days.
Yeah, the Jimbo Fisher experience has been really fascinating, and I said that whether it's on the field or on the sideline, it's going to be great theater in College Station this year. He brings in Bobby Petrino, DJ Durkin also there replacing their defensive guy. I think that Jimbo Fisher, there's too much talent for him to screw this up. They just have way too much talent. Walter Nolan was the number 1 player. He's on the defensive line. He's number 1 player in the recruiting class a year ago. Evan Stewart is an elite wideout. If they can't win, if they can't cobble together 8 or 9 wins this year, even 7 or 8, I would be stunned. The good thing is they took a step back last year, so any step forward is a step forward. It's a step in the right direction. But when Jimbo Fisher decides to give up play calling, that means it's panic time. And he's done that with Bobby Petrino. So I think you're right on the money there. I also think Billy Napier and Florida, the patience is running thin, even though he's just into his tenure. So I don't know how this looks this year. They ran out of patience with Dan Mullen. It could happen here very quickly within 2 or 3 years of Billy Napier. I think their quarterback situation is one that leaves a lot to be desired. So those would be the first 2 that come to mind.
It's just fascinating to understand the expectations at Florida and how good they were for as long as they were under Spurrier. And then they've just been a bit of a turnstile. You mentioned Mullen. He won. He got to SEC title games. They also had some embarrassing losses. They move on to Napier. And they want it fixed immediately. They want to snap their fingers, Schick, and have Florida be 9-3 and beating Florida State and Miami.
Yeah, I think you could kind of see the trend lines a little bit with Dan Mullen, which was concerning. 10 wins, 11 wins, 8 wins, 6 wins, see ya. One of the things, too, with it is that he was not recruiting at the level that Florida fans wanted him to recruit at. You could be 15th nationally and be 7th in the SEC in recruiting. And if you want to win national championships, that's not going to cut it. So I think that was a huge part of it. But, yeah, it's wash, rinse, repeat. They'll go through you. It's like a turnstile of coaches. And with NIL, with the transfer portal, you don't get 3 or 4 years anymore. You get 2 or 3. And if you're not showing signs, it's done. Because you don't have to recruit my own guys and wait for 3 or 4 years till my guys are upperclassmen. You can go recruit upperclassmen from other teams. Go get them. So, I think the time is now to turn this around. And another 5 or 6 win season for Billy Napier, and next year will be his last, or at least going in will be the real hot seat.
It's Matt Schick with us here at Hail Varsity Radio. And Matt, while we're talking about Florida here, there's a new docuseries. Well, the docuseries is Untold. They're on their third season. One of the episodes that's coming out here in August is going to be on Florida between 2006, 2009. Obviously, the Urban Meyer teams where there's so many good storylines with the Pouncey brothers, with Tim Tebow, with Aaron Hernandez. So much juicy stuff going on there. And I want to get your thoughts on just what that era of Florida was and what you think we might find out in this documentary.
Well, I mean, I think the juxtaposition of Tim Tebow, the Saint, with Aaron Hernandez, who killed people. Like, it's you have that on the extremes, and then you have everything in between. And then you've got Urban Meyer, and then you've got, like you said, some of those, with the Brandon Spikes and behind-the-scenes stuff with maybe a Percy Harvin. You mentioned the Pouncey twins. Like, this was a college football changing type of era when it comes to Urban Meyer at Florida, and I wonder what they're going to have. I wonder who got to sign off on it. I wonder who got first right of refusal, but I think there's going to be some pretty interesting stories.
More with Matt Schick, ESPN. He's in Bristol. Reminder to get buckled up. Use your seatbelt. It saves lives. It prevents injuries, only if properly worn. Buckle up, a message from the Nebraska Department of Highway Safety Office. Reminder about the podcast with Hail Varsity Radio. A couple of different ways to download and catch us on your time. Spotify, iTunes, Google Play is where you can go to get that download. Also, the live video feed at Hail Varsity YouTube. So both ways to access the show whenever you want. Of course, we're live 4 to 6. Monday through Friday, the weekend edition, 7:30 to 9, digitally. And great stuff from Coach George Darlington to get us kicked off. More with Matt Schick, our conversation with Schick. That continues here next segment. And then Mitch Sherman with us in hour one. Hail Varsity Radio continues. More with Matt Schick. We're presented by Currency.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
Matt Schick's with us, the Schick and Nick show, of course, on the Hurrdat Podcast Network. Matt, want to talk Nebraska and some Big Ten media days around the corner. And you look at Coach Rule, he'll be one of the faces that'll be new for sure. But Nebraska will have a little bit of buzz because of Rule's track record and him and Fickle, of course. But you're so locked in on recruiting. Your thoughts on the job and the trips, the investment Nebraska's made in the state of Texas. It's big enough for the in-state programs, but it's also big enough for about everybody else to go invade and try and mine some talent out of the Lone Star State. Your reaction to the work Rule's put in Texas and his reputation down there.
Yeah, it's all about relationships, and you got to take advantage of the relationships you already have before you try and establish new ones. And so when you go into Texas and you get a handful of guys like they have for the 2024 class, recruit Texas, recruit Nebraska, and recruit wherever you can. I think that's where he's done such a very good job, is that he understands where his bread is buttered. He's not going to try and be somebody he isn't. And he's going to hang out in his areas of expertise, and as the years go on, as the months go on, he'll start making inroads in other places. But that takes time. He's already put in the time in Texas, and he's putting in a lot of time in Nebraska and in the 500-mile radius. So I think if you're a Husker fan, you're pretty intrigued by what has happened. I think this is a long play with Matt Rule. I think it's great that he's not taking a ton of transfers. Like, we can't quick microwave this thing. This is a slow bake. We are putting this in for 3 hours. This is a crock pot type of recruiting process. We just got to let it sit. We'll put it in the morning and check on it at night. We don't need the 60-second meal here. So I think that's where they're at. I think it's smart. And, again, if he can develop talent, it's not just recruit. It's recruit, retain, develop. And I think he checks those three boxes.
Matt, something that I've been struggling to figure out here in the Big Ten this year, specifically in the West Division, is who's going to be at the top of that come late November, early December, and where Nebraska is going to fall into that thick of it. Now, I know it's still July, but at this point in time, what's your read on the Big Ten West this year, and who should you think should be the favorites coming into 2023?
I think the top two teams in the West are, my prediction would be Iowa and Minnesota, simply because of the stability and where they're at and the boxes they check, and the fact that Iowa was absolutely atrocious last year offensively and yet still was able to win 8 games. So you upgraded quarterback significantly from a wet bag of hair to someone who could actually throw the ball and has played in the college football playoff. You upgraded tight end. You're upgrading it in other areas. You've got returning experience on an offensive line. Your defense is always a given. So I really like Iowa. It's hard to say, yeah, give me Wisconsin. I don't know what they're going to be. It's going to be different from what we've seen. I know they got a lot of good weapons. They got a transfer quarterback, and they've got enough to, I think, cobble together a really good record. But at the same time, they're going to be different in September than they are in November. So I think that's more of a guessing game. I got to go with what I know, and I would say give me the established roster, the established culture, the established staff, and maybe teams that have upgraded a little bit. I would say Iowa. I would say Minnesota. And then I think there's a collection of a few teams. I think Illinois takes a step back. They lost a lot, especially in the draft with Witherspoon and then Chase Brown in the backfield, with DeVito at quarterback. I don't know what they're going to be. So I would say they take a half step back, and I think the teams in transition are kind of pretty much even. And then the two teams with Iowa and Minnesota maybe get enough wins and supersede them.
Schick, would you watch a pay-per-view arm wrestling match over the top style between Brett Venables and Deion Sanders?
I think it would be better than a toe fight with his amputation there. Sorry, that was a terrible joke. Shouldn't have done it. I think with Brett, I would like to see that. Just keep your shirt on, Brett. I think just keep your shirt on, and we'll be fine. But yeah, I would mind seeing these guys kind of go at it. I think Big Ten Media Days could be really improved if we had some feats of strength. If we had, we have these things like in football stadiums. Why not see who can throw it the farthest? Can any of these guys, perform on the football field? Let's see it. Let's run them through the combine. Let's do that. We're on a football field. Let's take advantage of it.
Who are we picking to be the decathlon champion out of the Big Ten? I mean, Fickle seems to be still in pretty good shape. I'm trying Bielema. I'm sure the old shot put's still pretty handy for him. Ferentz
I would take Ryan Walters versus the field. Give me Ryan Walters. He'll check the box. He's not going to scare you, but athletically, he's just going to get it done. Without Fitz anymore, it's really an open season.
Yeah, that's my wrap-up question: is how many times should the word turd be used in a radio segment?
Well, it depends on the segment. It depends on the podcast. If it's the Schick and Nick podcast, you probably want to title your episode that and just play it 35 times during that, because no other coach said that except for Fitz when he was on with us years and years ago. So it's apropos. It's unfortunate, but I think you can't use that word enough. It's probably one of the most underutilized words in the English dictionary.
It is, it's got the main meaning, but it's just kind of fun to throw around, dare I say. The context Fitz used with Schick and Nick was when it comes to finding out a recruit's background, correct?
Yes. Yeah, Pat Fitzgerald, we asked him about recruiting. This is like 11, 12 years ago. And he said, you got to do a lot. You got to sit with the girls in the lunchroom and find out if he's a good kid or a turd. And the emphasis that he put on turd, it was so emphatic and so good. And frankly, a terrible play on words, but so juicy. So it was.
That was terrible.
Jeez, man.
That was terrible. It's Matt Schick with us here, Hail Varsity Radio. And Matt, before we get out of here, some breaking news today I want to get your thoughts on, not in the world of sports, but in the world of pop culture. Authorities in Nevada confirmed that they have served a search warrant in connection with the unsolved murder of Tupac. Do you think they ever find the killer of Tupac? Apparently they went over to Henderson, Nevada, served a search warrant, and they might be closer than they've ever been to finding the killer.
Wow. I'm glad they did it so quickly. I tell you, even the NCAA is like, come on, get on with it now. But yeah, that's really great. I've been losing a lot of sleep over this, and this is one of those things that is going to allow me to get on with my life as well. I can't wait to watch it. I can't wait to see it and see what happens there. And that's it's 30 years later, and you think you're going to get away with something, but long live Tupac. And I guess the tough part is it confirms that he's not alive. Like if they're finding someone and charging him with a crime, charging someone with that crime, then I guess that puts to bed a lot of conspiracy theories, which is unfortunate.
Matt Schick with us, ESPN. Of course, you find him on Sirius XM, College Football Live, the Schick and Nick podcast. Matt, thanks for taking time in Bristol with us today.
Absolutely, guys. Anytime you want, you know where to find me.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
One final time, it's Hail Varsity Radio. Good stuff from Matt Schick. Great stuff from George Darlington, as he's still hanging out in studio with us. Football Facts get going September 26th in Omaha, and Thursday, September 28th at SEC in Lincoln. We tweeted out, we posted out, and retweeted. Coach, appreciate you. Good to see you in that Hawaiian shirt. Glorious.
We tried to get him for one more segment. He said, not until you get me tacos, Schmitty.
I know. Well, we go grab tacos. He's the best. I love catching up with George Darlington. You want to hear that interview? We talked about getting into Hawaii for Nebraska, and also Matt Rule, year one, and then Football Facts and just recruiting in general. So great to get caught up with Coach Darlington.
And you can't forget, we had a little bit on the assassination of Abraham Lincoln as well.
Yeah, how that got weaved in is interesting and entertaining. Coach George always has a fact or two to bring in. Matt Schick was just on with us, and then Mitch Sherman in hour one. Tomorrow, Mike Babcock from Hail Varsity going to join us. Jeremiah Searles, our favorite Husker O-lineman, and Searles with us in the 5 o'clock hour, a Jock Doc to round us out. 489-1240. Podcast download, Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, or the Hail Varsity YouTube channel. So been a pretty eventful show with Coach joining us, and just fun to bend his ear and listen to some of the recruiting stories and just the connections he's made. I mean, there's not really a path he hasn't crossed, from the Orgerons to the Urban Meyers to the Rick Neuheisels to obviously being on staff with Coach Osborne since '73. So pretty cool, pretty awesome. And, of course, he and Bill Bush, Coach Bush, are extremely close, and you just love seeing that connection continue. So don't know if there's much recruiting news or info. I know it's been a big day in Texas for Nebraska and Matt Rule, because he was down at the Houston Coaches Association and the Texas High School Coaches Association, and Coach Rule had a presentation yesterday and also said hey and greeted, was one of the keynote speakers. And you have Nebraska, you have Coach Fritz in Tulane, and then, of course, old Grandpa Mac Brown, now at North Carolina. Those are the three college football coaches down there, and really no rest, and quite a number of Nebraska staff fellows that went down there with Rule. Yes, they have Texas connections, but they're not resting. I mean, camp is less than 2 weeks away, and then media days for our next Wednesday or next Thursday for Coach Rule. But the season's about here to get going.
And like to add together some of the things we've been talking about here to close this show, If Matt Rule's on the Tupac case, I think they may have solved that 25 years ago with how tirelessly he works.
Because he's always after it, isn't he?
He would have gotten there. He would have gotten to the bottom of that. He would have figured it out. He would have locked up that arrest, that search warrant 25 years ago, and we would know who did in fact kill Tupac. But alas, it's not Matt Rule in the case. So
no large collection of Tupac in the old playlist, Elijah and Connor.
Not particularly. I've always been more partial to Biggie myself.
It's all right. I'm not judging. I'm just asking.
I appreciate Tupac's contributions to music as a whole, but I think Biggie always resonated more with me.
We'll save your theory for what really happened for the Uncensored podcast.
It was Suge Knight, allegedly.
We'll talk tomorrow at 4. That was Elijah Herbel, Hail Varsity. Talk to you tomorrow at 4. Thanks.